Hello and welcome to this 16-lesson video series that'll help you get started with Visual C# 2005 Express Edition. These lessons and the accompanying document with supplemental readings are designed to take someone who is a complete novice, who has never written any code before, or maybe has just written a little code a while back, and help them be productive in writing real-world applications within a few hours. Now, if this describes you, you're in the right spot. If you're already an experienced developer or an experienced .NET developer, quite honestly, there will probably be better ways for you to spend your time. If you're looking for videos on advanced concepts or on new features in Visual C# 2005, Visual Studio 2005, or any of the latest development products from Microsoft, please navigate to www.learnvisualstudio.net for instructional video tutorials aimed at all skill levels. So if you're just getting started, the aim of this series is to help you become productive quickly. With that as our goal, please keep in mind that there are many concepts that I'll either gloss over or just ignore completely, so you may want to use this resource as a good introduction. However, the videos are not intended to replace reference books or online help that comes with Visual C# 2005 Express Edition, so I recommend at the end of this series of lessons to also dedicate yourself to other books, online resources, or even my website, www.learnvisualstudio.net, for more instructional videos to help you come to a more complete knowledge of Visual C#, the C# language, and application development. Developing software, especially with a language like C# and a software application like Visual C# 2005 Express Edition, is a lot of fun. Sure, it can be a little intimidating at first, but if you just take a little bit at a time, just like everything else in life, you'll start seeing results. Now, in my mind, there's nothing more gratifying than imagining some software application that I want to build and seeing it begin to come together, working through the problems and the hurdles, and then finally seeing the end result and letting others use it. I hope after this series of lessons, you get infected by the programming bug and begin to realize how exciting this can really be. Okay, it's time to get started. The lessons are arranged in the following way. Lessons 1 through 3 focuses on the workflow of building applications and getting comfortable with how to navigate around the Visual C# 2005 interface. Lessons 4 through 7 will focus on the C# programming language itself, as well as an introduction to the .NET framework. Lessons 8 through 11 will focus on working with data, displaying data from data sources like a database or an XML file, and handling the errors that come up in your application while it's running. And then lessons 12 through 16 will demonstrate the creation of an entire application from beginning to end, involving design, development, testing, and then deploying your application. The application that we'll build in the last 5 lessons will be an RSS reader. Now, if you're not familiar with the term RSS, that stands for Really Simple Syndication, and it's one of the latest trends on the internet. It allows websites, especially those websites that update their content frequently, like blogs, for example, to publish a short description of new articles as they're posted on the website. So users can subscribe to an RSS feed, which is basically a URL that points to a file on the web that contains the title of the article, a description of the article, a hyperlink so people can read the actual article. Now, to subscribe to a feed, the user is going to need a program that knows how to interpret an RSS feed, the special format that's used. Then it needs to periodically check each news feed that the user subscribed to so that it can determine if any of his favorite websites have new content available. So many popular websites have these little orange buttons with the word RSS or sometimes XML. This lets you know that an RSS feed is available for that website. Now, in our application, we're going to allow the user to subscribe to RSS feeds, which we're going to call channels. Then our application can be used to monitor those RSS feeds. And we'll have some other functionality as well, like being able to split up our feeds into various folders. So we'll be able to add, edit, and delete folders, and within a given folder we'll be able to add, edit, and delete channels, and then for a given channel we'll update it in order to find all the news items for that channel, and then we'll be able to click through. As you can see over here on the left hand side, I'm looking at the titles for the news items, and then on the right hand side I can view the full title, the description, The data was posted, and then I have a little browser window where I can look and see a little bit more about that web page that it's pointing to, and I can even click this little expand button here, which will pop open a web browser that allows me to view the page full screen if I'd like to. But we have a lot of information to cover before we get to this point. But I wanted to dangle a carrot out in front of you so that you stay engaged in this series of lessons. Just about everything we learn in the next 10 lessons will build up to creating that application. So make sure you understand each concept before moving on. So let's get started by talking about the basic steps of creating applications. And we'll begin by creating the most simple application we possibly can. All we want to do is create a Windows application. It's also known as a Windows Forms application. And on it we'll add a single button to the form that is created by default for us. And when the user clicks our little button, we're going to display a pop-up message that says, "Hello World." Now, Hello World is kind of the universal first program that you always build regardless of the programming language or the programming tool, because it helps you see the entire workflow of creating a program without having to introduce too much complexity so early into the learning process. So let's begin by going to File, New Project, and in the New Project dialog we're going to select Windows Application as the template that we'll begin with. Now we're also going to change the name from Windows Application 1 to Hello World, and then we'll select the OK button. And it takes a moment or two, but what C# is doing at this point is creating a template for a Windows application. So by default, after a moment or two, what we'll see is a form that'll pop up with nothing on it. Now at this point we have a complete Windows application. Let me do this just to prove that point. I'm going to use my mouse cursor and go to this little button. This is the Start button. This allows us to run our application in what's called debug mode. It allows us to see what the application will do if we were to stop right now and compile it and give it to a friend. Let's go ahead and hit Start. And the program is compiling right now, and as you'll see, what you have is a complete Windows application. Admittedly, it doesn't really do anything at this point, but you have your form, and on the right-hand side you have your typical Windows control box, and to minimize, to make it full screen, or to bring it back to its original size, and also to close the application. And you have a control box here on the left-hand side that allows you the typical Windows commands to minimize and maximize and close and so on. So to stop this application, we'll just click the X button. Now the next thing we wanted to do was put a button on our form. And to do that, we're going to hover our mouse cursor over the toolbox, and when we do, notice that it jettisons out from the left-hand side and allows us to scroll through all the controls that are available to us. Now a control is typically a visual element that allows the user to either interact with your application or read information from your application. And each of the controls are a little bit different. They have different propensities and different reasons why you'd want to use them. A button, for example, as we drag it and drop it off of the toolbox, will allow your user to indicate to the application that some action should be taken. So in this case, whenever the user clicks the button, they would expect something to happen, in our case, a message box that displays Hello World. So again, let's go to our Start button, run our application, and I want you to notice that we have a fully working application again with a button, and we can click the button as many times as we want to. I can even hold the button down. Notice that it's a little bit grayed out when I do that, but nothing really happens at this point because we haven't written any code that reacts to that button click. So that's really our next step. Okay, so this can be a little bit tricky the first time you see it, so pay close attention. What I'm going to do is double click this button, and when I do, another file will be open within our main area. Now notice that we have a series of tabs at the top, and this is a good time to start talking about that. We can see the design view, which gives us a visual representation of what the form is going to look like. But then we can also see what's called a code view, and this allows us to write code that in this case reacts to things that happen on our form. Now, when we double-click that button, it created what's called an event handler. We're going to talk about event handlers in Lesson 3, so I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. But notice that we have a blinking cursor on the correct line between these two little curly braces. So you want to make sure that you type the following line of code. MessageBox.show, use an open parenthesis, quote, hello world, another quote, close parenthesis, and then a semicolon at the end. Now again, we'll take the time to discuss all the things that you see here. Let's not get bogged down in that just now. Let's just take it at its face value and type this information in. And then what I'm going to do is select the Start button one more time. And when I do, this time I'm going to click the button and I'll get a little box that pops up, a message box that says Hello World. And I can click this as many times as I want to, and each time I do, notice that the code that I wrote will be executed again. Let's go ahead and close our application. Okay, so we successfully created our first Windows application, a Hello World application. The next thing that we want to do, especially if we want to keep this application for future reference or to work on it again in the future, what we'll need to do is save our project. Now, there's two ways to do this. The first way is to go to File, Save All, or we can just use the toolbar shortcut for Save All. And when we do, notice that there's a little dialog that pops up that asks us for the name of the project, which we already named Hello World whenever we created the application. Then it asks us the location that we want to save our project to. Now, by default, it's going to attempt to put it in your My Documents directory under a subdirectory called Visual Studio 2005/projects. And it will create a new folder called Hello World. So let's go ahead and use the default. There's one good reason why you'd want to do this as opposed to finding a different location on your hard drive. And that reason is because a lot of the backup software that's available today for Windows XP looks by default in your My Documents directory and tries to save it. So if that's the case, then you'll automatically get the benefit of backing up all of your source code if you were to follow this little convention. Okay, great. So our application is now saved. We're going to come back to that thought in just a moment, but let's talk about how our project's organized. First of all, there's a lot of code that can be added to a software application, and all the code that gets compiled into a single program is called a project. So a project is an organizational unit that keeps track of all of the files that will all be compiled together into one application, usually a .exe program. There's also another organizational unit called a solution. Now you can see the hierarchy between a project and a solution over here on the right-hand side in the Solution Explorer. This shows us, first of all, the name of our project, Hello World, and then all the files and other important information that makes up our Hello World project. Over here, below it, such as our Form 1, for example, and then there's other files like a program.cs that we didn't have to modify, that were created automatically for us whenever we use the Windows application template, whenever we were creating a new application. Now in our particular project, we only had one form. It was very simple, but we could have dozens of forms potentially within our application. And so they'd all be listed here within the Solution Explorer, underneath the main organizational unit called Hello World. That's our project. Also, a solution can contain multiple projects. Now, the reason why you'd want to do that may not be very clear right now, but once you get into more advanced software development, the concept of a solution might come in handy. So let's just table that discussion for right now and focus just on the main organizational unit being our projects. And again, just put another way, the only purpose of a project is to keep track of all of the files and all of the code that belongs to a single application. Now let's take a brief moment and open up our Windows Explorer. I'm going to go to Start, and I happen to have it pinned here, but you may have to navigate to All Programs, Accessories, Windows Explorer in order to view what's on my hard drive now, what was placed on my hard drive. So by default, mine comes up to My Documents. I'm going to find my Visual Studio 2005 folder, And then I'm going to find my project subfolder, and notice that I have a Hello World folder underneath that. Now, we have a solution file here. We can pull things over so you can see it a little bit more easily. Keep in mind that that is the top organizational unit, so a solution can contain projects. So what will happen is there will be one project folder for each project in a solution. Since we only have one project, there's only one subfolder called Hello World. Happens to be named the same thing. So this is the folder for the project itself. Notice first of all that we have a Visual C# project file. So this will keep track of all the files that belong to our project. Then we also have a few files with the similar names, form1, form1.cs, form1.designer.cs. The purpose of these will become more obvious in the next lesson, so we'll just table that discussion too for right now. But then we can also see our little program.cs and so on. Now there's a special folder where our compiled applications live once we run the application. Whenever we run the application, there's an interim build called a debug build that allows us to run the application but then also see the results of running the application by putting breakpoints and things of that nature, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But if we wanted to run our application, now we have two places we can run it from. We can go back to our Visual C# interface and then select the Start button, or we can just go down here and drill into our bin folder, which is a special folder that was created automatically for us, and then go to the debug folder, and you'll notice there's a couple of files there, but the one in particular that has the type of application is our Hello World application. So we can double click it and we can run it just like we were if we were to run it a few moments ago in Visual C#. So we have a complete application, and if somebody had the .NET framework, we could actually take this application now and put it on their hard drive and it would run. But there's actually a better way to do this, and that's not the preferred way. So let's just not do that at the moment. I just wanted to let you know that a real application has been built. It's a debug version of the application, but it's still able to run just as if we were to run it or install it on somebody else's computer. So this gives us a pretty good overview of what happens on our hard drive whenever we save our application. Also the organizational units of projects. We have projects which contain files of source code. And then we also have a solution which contains multiple projects. And we've seen how that's structured on our hard drive. So I'm going to close Windows Explorer for right now and move on. So the Solution Explorer has a very important purpose within Visual C# because it allows us to manage the files that are within our project. Now, let's talk for a moment about some of the things that we can do with the Solution Explorer. First off, if we were to accidentally or purposefully close any of the tabs within our main area by selecting the little Close button here on the right-hand side of the tab, we can get back to that form or the code view in one of two ways. We can either select the icon that represents the form and then select the code view button, or select it and click the View Designer button, or we can just double click the icon and the default view, the designer view, will open up. Additionally, we can add and remove files from our project from here as well. We can right click and select Add New Item, which allows us to select any of the possible files that we can insert. Or we might just want to insert a new Windows form, in which case we would select this here. We'll talk about this more a little bit later whenever we're developing more intense applications. Let's go ahead and ignore this for now by clicking somewhere in the white area to get rid of that context menu. Also, at some point we'll probably want to shut down our computer, so we'll need to know how to close our application and then reopen it again. So once we make sure that our project is saved by clicking the Save All button, then we can select Close Solution. This will unload the project from Visual C#, or we could just shut down Visual C#. It'll prompt us if we have any unsaved changes. To begin, let's go to Start, Visual C# 2005 Express, And to open up our project, we can either select from an existing project, our Hello World project is listed here, or we can go to File, Open Project, and then we'll need to navigate to the appropriate directory, my computer. Let's go to our desktop here, or rather our documents. So Bob's Documents, Visual Studio 2005, Projects, Hello World, and then I can select the solution file or the project file, whichever one is available to me first, and I'll select Open. And now I have my project again. You see it pops open. Any of the forms that I had open the last time that I saved the application. And we're good to start working on our application again. So that's how to shut down and reopen our applications. Finally, we're going to be writing a lot of code. So what I want to do very early on is introduce the concept of debugging. And when I use the term debugging, what I really mean is that we want to pause the execution of the application so that we can watch each line of code execute and look through the code and see if there's something that catches our eye. Now, this is very useful whenever our programs get much larger and we need to observe what's going on behind the scenes, because sometimes our applications may not give us enough feedback, or something's going on, it's hard to pinpoint the exact problem. So what we'll want to do in that case is set a breakpoint, which will stop the execution of our application while we're in debug mode, while we're running our application with this little start button here. And it'll allow us to step through each line of code at our own pace and watch how the application executes. Now again, this isn't going to be very impressive with just one line of code within our application. But if we were to have more lines of code like we will in the upcoming lessons, this is a very, very important feature of a development environment to allow us this rich functionality to watch the code execute. So to create a breakpoint, what I want to do is get back to my code view. So let's select our Form 1 and then select View Code. And what I want to do is put a breakpoint on the line of code that we wrote, the messagebox.show hello world. So to create a breakpoint, there's actually a number of ways. The easiest way is to just go to the left-hand side of that line of code. In this little gray area, we want to click it. And when we do, notice that a little red button appears. And then our text is highlighted in red. This tells us that the application will stop executing at this line of code and it'll wait for us to take over. So now let's run our application by clicking the Start button. Our application is executing just fine, but whenever I click button 1, notice that that red line of code now turns to yellow. This tells me that that's the next line of code that will be executed. Now to walk through this line of code, what I can do is simply use one of these buttons that have been added to our development environment because we're in debug mode. So I'm going to click either the Step Into button or F11, but I could just as easily select the Step Over or Step Out, and we'll talk about those much later in this series of lessons. For our purposes right now, let's just click the Step Into button, and when I do, notice that it executed that line of code to display a message box, and I'm going to click OK and go back to our code view and notice that the next line of code is this end of our little method here, the little curly brace. So we can just either select to step into one more time, or I'm just going to select to continue executing the application, and now we're running the app again in full speed. So just keep that little tip in mind. We're going to use that throughout the coming lessons to watch how our code executes, especially in lesson number 4 and 5. So phew, that was a lot of information for the first lesson. I hope you enjoyed it, and if there's something that didn't make sense, please watch it again. Or just continue on, and some of the questions you might have in your mind might be answered in upcoming lessons. So this would also be a good time to read through the first 2 or 3 lessons in the accompanying document that I provided. If you enjoyed this video, please visit www.learnvisualstudio.net to download and watch over 400 videos just like this one, aimed at all skill levels, on many different topics related to C#, Visual Basic.net, ASP.NET, and more. Thank you.